Hello, adventurer. It's good to see you. You have made it to the morning grind.
Welcome, welcome.
It's the live stream at the beginning of the Geekverse, where we talk about all types of topics in geekdom, gaming, and fantasy, with an emphasis on being constructive and creating the things that we want to exist in the world.
It's all on the grind, Sizemore. Can't be too fine, can't be too coarse.
That's exactly right. There are a lot of adventures to be had today. Dungeons to explore and monsters to slay, and who knows what a random encounter might send our way. That's why we have to prepare. So settle in now for the morning grind with your favorite beverage in hand.
Tea? Or maybe something a little stronger. I've got a few bottles of the old Wynyard left.
Whatever you want. Pull up a chair.
Dude.
If you're feeling fancy, how about a cappuccino? Or a frappuccino? Or how about an espresso?
Just tea, thank you.
Sounds good to me, Gandalf. Whatever you want. I'm just glad you're here.
Everyone is welcome. You can just watch if you want. You don't have to worship anything you don't want to worship.
Thank you, Mike. But be forewarned.
Sometimes we get really strange characters around here.
Wait, what's that you say? Why can't you come and be a part of the stream?
My wife would disown me.
Oh no, I bet she'll be fine with it. Come on in.
Am I scared for my safety? No.
What are we supposed to do?
Everybody do the secret handshake.
Secret cultist handshake.
Oh, now do wizards who love each other.
This, my friend, is a science.
I still don't have gills, but it's fine.
It's all on the grind, son. Can't be too fine, can't be too coarse.
Dude, this would be a sick place to bring the band.
Indeed it would be, Dave. It really would. I'm seeing more people coming in. Welcome. Glad to have you here. Oh, look, here's someone new.
Is this the cultist meetup?
Yes it is.
Come to hang out? Please accept me. I have nothing else.
Okay, we accept you. Everyone's welcome here.
Brought some snacks.
Well, that makes things even better.
You want some coffee? I don't drink coffee. You sure? It's cultist coffee. What makes it cultist coffee? I'm a cultist and I'm drinking it. Oh. Then I'll have some.
What exactly is going on here?
I'm seeing more people coming in. Welcome. It's so great to have you. Oh, and look, here comes another stranger.
Can we help you?
Yes, fellow cultists. I could really use some food.
Oh yeah? Welcome. We have donuts.
Oh, it's me. I'm glad I'm here. I'm sure you have a few questions for me, though.
What's your name? Who do you work for? What god do you worship?
Great questions, Rob.
I'm Steve King, and I worship Nyarlathotep.
No, not really. I'm just Heath, and I won't be worshiping anything this morning. But I will be your host. Welcome to the office. We're going to have a great time. I've got my coffee ready, because now it's time for the morning grind.
If you could become a fish, that would be amazing. Then I could command you with my mental fish powers.
Good morning, everyone. Let me, how are you doing today? It is so good to see you this morning. I apologize for being a few minutes late, trying to get everything in order over here. Hey, Mike. Hello, Toadstool Hollow. See, the Mad Lad is actually going to review this book, Jason says. I don't know him. Tom Kretz says, I had a book, or a copy of this book once, but I can't find it. I have never looked at this book before. We're going to be looking at the Book of Erotic Fantasy. I have never looked at it before. I haven't opened it up even to see what is inside it, so I'm going to be looking at it for the first time here. Eggplant 96 says, haha, I remember this book. Hard to imagine people actually using the material in it. Jason says, I flipped through it once out of curiosity. If it's what people are into, more power to them. Not for me, though. No, I'm here. Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, so let me say what's going on. So last night I was trying to, I like to do a wind down on Wednesday nights. But last night I was just exhausted, and especially with the topic of everything else going on with Wizards of the Coast and the Kyle Brink interviews. I was watching his interview with Teos yesterday, and I was typing up notes about things that things I want to say about that, and I do have things to say about that. I was typing up notes yesterday, but yesterday I wanted to get a haircut. I had to do some grocery shopping. I had to go and take care of some other errands. By the time I got back, I just didn't feel like I was in my best situation to handle specifically a topic of that kind, because I know that's the kind of stuff people wanted to talk about. And that's an important subject and not one that I want to handle lightly. And so I decided to not do a live stream last night. But we are looking at the book of erotic fantasy today. And I think that it's important to look at. Somebody asked me in the comments, did I need to look at the book of erotic fantasy? And no, I don't need to look at the book of erotic fantasy. That wasn't the point. But I do think it's important to look at, because we've been covering the subject of morality clauses on the show. That's come up on the channel in general. That's come up in the context of the OGL and different licenses and things like that. And as far as I know, now this is a situation with that's come up with Kyle. As I was watching his different interviews right now, of course, he was very concerned, and he continued to reiterate this in his interviews, that he is concerned about. Now he was using hateful content. He gave examples of hateful content. Oh, and actually, no, take that back. He did not give examples of hateful content. He just said that he was very concerned about the publication of that kind of material, and that was part of the reasoning for his wanting to change up the OGL, and all of that stuff that went down. So that's what he was talking about. So I was very interested in finding examples of potential material where this had run afoul of, right? And as far as I know, one example that we have is the book of erotic fantasy. And so we're going to get into its history in just a moment. So I think that, understanding what this one is important. I think I did have, what you might be talking about is saying that it was scheduled for 7:30. I think I did accidentally schedule it for 7:30, but 9:30 is the 9:30 Central Time, right? So DM Thor says, this book I thought could be a bit intriguing. I got it and looked through it and was just stupid. All right. So, I mean, that could be the case. See, I don't have any great expectations for this book, but I think it's important to understand in the context of, well, now, wait a minute. Now, what if somebody wanted to, what kind of material could somebody publish that somebody is not going to be okay with? It does kind of strike me as well as something that could be, it could strike me as something that is just something that, hey, what can we put out that is shocking, right? That's kind of seems like to me that could be the kind of thing. What will we put out there that people are going to buy and could be shocking? So, all right, let's see here. Let's go to the messages. I've got my drink here. Let's go to the messages, and then we'll bring that up. And first, we want to take a look at the history here. The Morning Grind is brought to you by World Anvil. For all the RPG players out there, World Anvil offers extensive character management, including character sheets, journals, inventory, and spellbook. Everything a player looking to lose themselves in their character could want. Use the code MORNINGGRIND to get 40% off yearly subscriptions. The Morning Grind is also brought to you by the Cool Name RPG. Cool Name will provide design aids, tools, and resources that make it easier than ever for third parties to make new compatible content. Support its development now on Kickstarter. And thank you for being here with me live on The Morning Grind. And if you're watching on replay, welcome to you as well. It's great to have you here. If you're enjoying The Morning Grind, please click the like button and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. It will really help the channel grow, and I would be very thankful. We also have the Ravenkeep Discord server you can join if you would like to be a part of the community. All right, that's what you need to know. Let's get to the main topic. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is make note of a mistake that I had made concerning this book. So Robert says, oh, nice. The beginning of the end of the D20 system license. I remember when this happened. Right. That's kind of what I was thinking of, because we've been talking on this channel, and Ryan Dancy had made a tremendous amount of distinction between the OGL and then a D20 trademark license. Right. And the way that those things worked together to achieve what he was trying to do with open gaming, and then also still maintaining, some idea that bridge gap, that bridge brand between third-party publishers and Dungeons and Dragons material being D20, and then having the D20 be a more restrictive license, the D20 logo being a more restrictive license, and all of that. And I thought incorrectly, and I probably have said this on a stream before, I thought that the Book of Erotic Fantasy was published with the D20 trademark license, and that is what set off apparently some kind of firestorm. I don't actually remember like that firestorm going on. I was probably not aware of this firestorm going on, but in retrospect, I am. But but let's see over here. I want to take a look at well, actually, okay, let's look at this first. Let's say that here, before we actually get into this book, I was wrong about that, and I noticed that when I was looking at the cover on eBay, because I was like, just from the cover, I was thought that, okay, then the D20 trademark license is going to be on this book. But that's not true. It's not. So looking at the front here, here's the front cover, and then they have the back cover as well next up, right? And the D20 logo is not on here, okay? So why is that? What was the kind of timeline then? So I was looking at, and I don't have a whole lot of information about that, but I did notice that Wikipedia has some information on that. So let's go over here to the D20 system and what Wikipedia says about that. And Wikipedia at least provides the following information. The Book of Erotic Fantasy and 2003 change. When gaming company Valar Project, under former Wizards of the Coast brand manager Anthony Valtera, attempted to publish the D20 Book of Erotic Fantasy, which focused on sexual content, Wizards of the Coast altered the D20 trademark license in advance of the publication of the Book of Erotic Fantasy by adding a quality standards provision that required publishers to comply with community standards of decency. This subsequently prevented the book's publication under D20 STL, and the D20 STL is the license that allowed people to use the D20 trademark license. Wizards of the Coast said this was done to protect its D20 system trademark. Okay, so I was wrong on the timeline then. I thought this book was released, and then that's what caused the changes. So apparently they knew this book was coming, and they changed the licensing of the D20 license, or the D20 trademark, in advance of this book. And so it was not put out with the D20 system logo. So that's important to know. Wizards of the Coast said this was done to protect the D20 system trademark. The Book of Erotic Fantasy was subsequently published without the D20 system trademark under the OGL. So it was published with the OGL because there's nothing you can do to stop somebody from publishing under the OGL. There's no community standards of decency or morality clause or anything like that with the OGL. But there was, because the D20 license is completely separate. So other books subsequently published under circumstances include Skirmisher Publishing's Nuances, which includes on its cover the disclaimer, warning intended for mature readers only. And I haven't never heard of that book. The same round of changes to the license also limited the size at which the text requires the use of Dungeons and Dragons Player's Handbook 3rd edition, published by Wizards of the Coast, which is required to appear on the front or back cover of most fantasy D20 system products could be printed, and prohibited making part of it larger than the rest. This was perceived as being aimed at the same Valar book. Early mock-ups of the cover had the words Dungeons and Dragons in the above text printed much larger and in a different font than the rest, right at the top of the front cover. This could have made the book appear to be an official D&D publication to the casual or uninformed observer. The published version does not have that text on the cover. So I think that's very interesting. So the limit of that, because you're right, you could kind of make it appear that Dungeons and Dragons with this required text not with the OGL, but required text if you're going to be using the D20 trademark, because you weren't allowed to put something like character creation in a book that used the D20 trademark license, because you were specifically supposed to say that you required the Dungeons and Dragons player's handbook in order to use that material. So I guess one thing somebody could have done is exactly that, put Dungeons and Dragons gigantic on the front of their cover, says requires the use of in small Dungeons and Dragons, and make it look like some type of official Dungeons and Dragons product or something like that. So that's interesting. So that's why then I'm going to take this down and then put back up the book of erotic fantasy. So that's why then, with the correct timeline understanding, that those changes were made in advance of the publication of this book. Is anybody else aware of any other material like this that has caused this kind of change? So we're looking at one, because I would like to be able to look at specific examples. Okay, like when Kyle Brink is talking about in these interviews that he's concerned about hateful content. And of course, there was also obscene content in the 1.2, 1.1, but also 1.2 potential revisions, potential new versions of the OGL. They also talked about obscenity. But Kyle Brink has talked a lot about in his interviews that he's concerned about hateful publications. But he hasn't given examples of those. So I don't know what he's talking about. That's part of the vagueness that we've been dealing with throughout all of this. That, okay, we don't want there to be anything hateful. Okay, but what exactly does that mean? You say that you're seeing this stuff out there. Can you provide some examples of books or publications that you regard as hateful or obscene or that fall into this category? So that's another reason why I think this book is potentially important, because even though this book is 2003, 2003, this is one of the only publications that I can think of that actually required Wizards to make a change, or that had a problem with. Is there anybody else who knows a book like that Wizards has taken a stance on? So Robert says, yes, perfect example of how a trademark license works versus open source like the OGL. Hi, Millmaster. Good to see you. So Micah says, hey, yeah, Robert, and something they tried to use as justification for the GSL, among other things. Didn't quite work, did it? Good morning, Heather. Good morning. Hi, James. Retro Nerd Girl is also here. Good to see you. This book was Streisand effect incarnate. Eli says, yes. Only reason anyone has heard of it at all is because of the attempts to shut it down. And that's the only reason that we're about to look at it here, right? Yeah, because give us a specific example of a book that Wizards did not want to have to be associated with. Well, it's this one right here. Something tells me it's not going to live up to the hype. We will see. Actually, the D20 license plus OGL worked very well for Wizards and publishers. I think it did. And it certainly, I mean, it did what Wizards, what Ryan Dancy expected it to do for Wizards of the Coast, right? Yeah, I know. So we're looking at a PDF here because did not go out to eBay to try to get a physical copy because they are expensive. Oh, Heather says, I used it in a campaign. We definitely found creative ways to use it. Okay, that's interesting. Oh, really? Oh, me? Oh, you were calling me a mad lord for reviewing it? Well, it's not a review or investigation, an investigation of the topic. So Micah says, yeah, there are a lot of homebrew RPG stuff, but in terms of actual printed, this is the one that people have heard of the most. Okay, well, let's just see what actually is in this. Okay, so the first thing that I'll notice, though, is that so instead, it says up here at the top, this product is compliant with the Open Gaming license and is compatible with the world's best-selling fantasy role-playing game. So people had mentioned that in the beginning, or during the whole controversy, talking about, are you compatible with the OGL? Are you compatible with the OGL? But that doesn't make any sense. Because the OGL is just the license. You need to attach material to the license to be compliant with it. the OGL allows you to be compliant with some other material or compatible with some other material that's attached to the license. So that doesn't make any sense to say. But here, I bet that obviously the reason they are saying that is because they were specifically told not to use the D20 trademark license. So instead, they put right here at the very top, this product is compliant with the open gaming license. So even though that's kind of nonsensical as far as what the meaning of that is, or what they're trying to say here, I mean, it might use the open gaming license. They were clearly trying to use that as branding, in effect, even though it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. They were trying to use it as branding. So what did they do here? They say love and battle are both intimate acts, both done in the heat and sweat with the sound of cries echoing in your ears. And really, who's to say which is the most dangerous, the paladin Velaria? For decades in the gaming world, the subject of this product has been the source of much debate and speculation. Now you hold in your hands a 192-page full-color book that will finally address the issues of sex, love, seduction, marriage, and pregnancy for what they are saying here, the OGL system. So obviously they thought that it was important for their branding or their sales or whatever to try to have something on this book that linked it in some way to what Dungeons and Dragons was doing. And so I guess they latched on to just OGL, which you don't see in other publications. There might be some others, but like I was saying, because of that general nonsensical statement that, hey, I'm compliant with the OGL, like, why would you say that? But here's a situation where apparently they thought that was valuable. This book contains over 20 new feats, 3 new classes, and 12 new prestige classes, 6 new domains, over 75 new spells, 6 new gods, 12 new monsters, and many usable as player character races and variant rules. This material is intended to add new dimensions to your game: courtly intrigue and manipulation, marriages of power and prophesized births, dangerous seducers, and sex magic. All of this and more awaits you inside the Book of Erotic Fantasy. To hear you talk, we are facing an apocalypse, the world ending as we know it, the stars falling from the skies, the gods walking upon the earth and condemning us all for our transgressions. Look, I know I'm good, but darling, it's only sex. Cheval to Velaria after their first night. Okay. So let's go to the table of contents and figure out what is in this book. So chapter 1, love, sex, and role-playing. Why include sex in your game? Handling sex in a mature way. Sex and role-playing. Consequences of love and sex. Sexual taboos. Rites of passage. Marriage. Commitment. Sex and the alignments. Sex and the species. Player character races. Other creature types. Rules, skills, and feats. Rules for sex. Sustaining sex skills. Sexually transmitted diseases, fetishes, pregnancy, and childbirth. Base and prestige classes in Chapter 3. Chapter 4, magic. So what kind? New domains: body, denial, joining, perversion, pleasure, voyeur domain. Bard, cleric, images, paladin spells. Chapter 5, items: sexual goods, aphrodisiacs, birth control devices. Chapter 6 is gods and monsters. Chapter 7 is adventures and organizations. Okay, all right. Hey, Hayes, good to see you. And good morning, Epi. Let's see. Eli says that Drive-Thru RPG already has a hate speech policy. If they don't publish your work, it's practically invisible. Now, this one is on Drive-Thru RPG. Now, I suppose this is sexual and erotic content. But I was told, because I was looking on eBay and I was saying this is too expensive. Like, okay, I'm not going to be able to get one. But this book is published off Drive-Thru RPG, so that's how I was able to get it. This PDF is exactly on Drive-Thru RPG. Yes, please do like the stream. If you are here, please do like the stream and subscribe if you're not subscribed, because only about 9.4% of the people who watch the channel subscribe. So please do do that. Micah says this book has a lot of world building stuff that makes some semblance of sense for a world with the other stuff that D&D has, though it does have a lot that's a bit out there and quite a bit problematic as well. But it does comment upon that and the matter of it being only for tables that want to tackle such subjects. Okay, so let's see. Let's get into it then. Let's see what it says. It says handling sex in a mature way. It says, you decide to let sex into your game. Once the topic of sex comes up in a game, it can quickly, if left unchecked, turn into a sophomoric joke with bawdy humor, crude references, and otherwise inappropriate behavior resulting. There's nothing wrong with this. Humans tend to push sexuality into the sphere of humor as a way of overcoming our own unease, our feelings of inadequacies. By letting the jokes come out naturally, the mood loosens. Oh, by the way, another reason that I suppose the topic of sexuality and role-playing is specifically important with what's going on is because with Teos yesterday, when I was watching that interview, Kyle Brink specifically brought up pornographic material as something that he didn't want Dungeons and Dragons to be associated with. He brought up the idea that he did not want somebody to develop like a virtual reality game with sexual content and have that person try to say, okay, let's redefine. He used the term redefining what Dungeons and Dragons is by creating a pornographic virtual reality game. And then he was afraid that people would have to clarify that if they said, oh, I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons, that people would say, oh, you mean that pornographic thing? And he was like, that he didn't want to have to say, no, not the pornographic thing, just the thing at the table. For some reason, he thought that somebody would actually be able to use the trademark and the term Dungeons and Dragons to create virtual reality pornography. He brought that up as a concern of his as to why the OGL went down. So the issue of sexuality in games is apparently something that he is very concerned about as the executive director of Dungeons and Dragons, because that's what he was talking about. At least he purported to be very concerned about that in the interviews. Now, I brought that. I bring this up because, as I've mentioned, that like, what is our status of sexuality with something like Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon? Because I want to create material that's kind of similar to that. That also that has more violent. And then violent content as far as battle and war goes, but then also deals with sexuality. And so we were even talking about that in the context of the Cypher system morality clause. Like, are you allowed to deal with sexual material? Or is that regarded as obscene? So I think it is an important discussion. Because I have to admit that sexuality and sex doesn't come up at my tables. I don't know that we've ever really been involved with that I can remember in any great way. But it could, sexuality is, and a part of, humanity. So, how we address it, I think is a legitimate subject to talk about, whether that's in, novels or films, but also in games. So by letting the jokes come out naturally, the mood loosens, allowing everyone involved in the game to feel more relaxed about the subject and get on with the game. A mature DM begins by letting his players know that he plans, and what level he is considering doing so. Before allowing sexual situations and explicit descriptions into your game, you, as the DM, need to consider several things ahead of time. Will sex be one element in a single NPC? Or is sex part of the continuing storyline of an overarching adventure? Will you allow the characters to incorporate the rules described in this book, or will they only be the province of NPCs? How are you going to deal with sex scenes? Will they be off stage, or will there be descriptions? How far can these descriptions go? What's the RPG that does have the sex move? Is that Apocalypse World? There's one game that we should probably look at, but that one does actually have what they called a sex move, which tells you what kinds of things happen when one player of a particular type has sex with another player, right? Or another character, not player, but could be another character, right? I mean, I guess it could be another player's character, but we're talking about characters in general here. And they do talk about how that doesn't have to be something that is on screen, so to speak, that's being acted out and talked about right there at the table, but that's a way that, well, now if these situations and these intimate situations come up, what are the consequences? So, you could certainly not have anything graphic described at your table, but still have the consequences of sexuality at the table. I didn't think the Book of Erotic Fantasy was bad aside from the artistic depictions, at least what I remember back in the day. Robert says, I thought the license preemptively yanked prior to publications, and that apparently is the case. The one thing that I remember Heather says was changing the new attribute rather than using the new ones there. Not a lot was used, but a couple of flavor. Lots of comments here. The Book of Vile Darkness, I think we should look at too. Jason says, what really kills me about the Book of Erotic Fantasy controversy? Wizards published the Book of Vile Darkness in 3.x with Dungeons and Dragons logo on the cover. I have that sitting back here, but it's been a long, long, long time since I've looked at it. I basically don't remember anything in it. But I think that one is another one that we should look at. Okay, let's go back over to what's going on here. Players need to communicate with the DM as well. If a player feels uncomfortable with the tone, action, or dialogue used during the game, it's his responsibility to let the DM know. It's the DM's responsibility to handle the situation. This book should be used to add flavor or spice to a campaign. Not every rule will be used in a given campaign. Indeed, even the sexual acts may be boiled down to a mere comment or a die roll if used for a specific purpose, such as magic. Ultimately, it's up to the DM to make sure that her players are capable of handling the subject with appropriate aplomb and humor while keeping the flow of the adventure in mind. I don't think I had any kind of problem with that passage about how potentially to handle sexuality in a game. So, sex and role-playing. The lusty wench beckons you upstairs to get to her room. What do you do? At their essence, role-playing games are nothing more than storytelling using rules, dice, and paper to help the story move along. Part of the appeal of these sorts of games is describing exactly what your character does, and indeed portraying someone other than yourself. Speaking out with what your character says and does, both on the battlefield and in the bedroom, helps give him 3 dimensions and makes the character one you remember. Because of this emphasis on role-playing, the Book of Erotic Fantasy strays slightly from the traditional violence and bloodshed of traditional gaming, although there is still plenty here to add to the good hack-and-slash campaign. A gaming group, and that's also, I hear that come up, that's culturally dependent as well. In fact, I even think that George R. R. Martin, I remember George R. R. Martin talking about that, particularly with American audiences. And he was saying that people in the United States said he could describe somebody being hit in the head with a battle axe, and that battle axe doing, horrifically graphic and gory things to that person's skull and brain. And he said that American audiences didn't care, that wasn't something that it was ever brought up, but that as soon as he described something that was sexual, that there was some kind of graphic depiction of something that was happening sexually, he was saying that American audiences did have a problem with that. So this is definitely cultural. So you might find that in other situations, like it's often brought up that Europe is traditionally more sexually libertine than the US is. So there may be things that you could describe or say to a European audience, or just other audience in general, that they wouldn't care about, that an American audience would have a problem. So that is also a problem with trying to deal with what exactly is or is not within the bounds of some particular level of morality, because that's going to change, right? See, Nephenor says, as much as people are unwilling to admit it, the vagueness is on purpose. They want to be able to label something they don't agree with politically as hateful. And I think we need more examples. See, I would like to have more examples. Oh, so there was so great. So DM Thor says, "Good morning. I remember this book coming out, and nobody in my local gaming store was very impressed with it. There was also a great net handbook of sex text files in the 1990s." See, I'm expecting. I'm not expecting a whole lot out of it. Won't be too long before third parties will be saying compatible with the world's former most popular role-playing game. Yes. Okay. This book is not a mature way. That it could be the case. So let's see. A gaming group that takes these rules and suggestions to heart agrees that the telling of the story is most important part. Emotions, feelings, and descriptions of acts of love, both emotional and physical, are par for the course. Does this mean that every sexual encounter should be described in intimate graphic detail? Of course not. Generally, there is no need to describe a sex act in detail any more than there's a need to describe the swing of a sword and the angle at which it strikes the opponent and the exact manner in which it cuts through the body. Sometimes a very poor or good roll cries out for editorial, and the orc's head flies from his body and rolls down the stairs. The same might be true for a sexual encounter. The next morning, she looks up at you with a look of pure worship. Sex in the game is a means for advancing a plot, rounding out the character, creating memorable NPCs, and now as a means for increasing the power of your character. If you and your players have decided that spelling out sexual acts in the game is cool, then do so with as much or as little description as you want. Okay, all right. I mean, we're not going to read through every bit of this, but I did want to know how it set this up. And so far, I mean, I haven't had any major problem with the way that it was set up. Those the outset this topic on the outset. Let's see, rating sex in your game. One of the ways that you could decide how sex is portrayed in your game is to look at it in terms of the ratings applied to movies. By figuring out ahead of time what rating your game will have, you can let your players know how prominent sex is going to be in it. G, this is the level that most fantasy role-playing games take place in, with sexual activity entirely absent. At most, there will only be vague or oblique sexual reference. Nudity is completely absent. Characters who use their charm to get what they want come across as flirtatious, but nothing more. PG, this type of game deals with more mature subjects and includes sex, but still without explicit scenes or descriptions. Love, relationships, flirting, and seductions are all fair game, but any sex will occur off stage. R, this baseline rating incorporates the rules described in this book. So it's saying this book itself would be an R rating. Nudity and sexual situations are common, although the level of detail may stop at a certain point. NC-17, in this type of game, nothing is taboo. Sex scenes are described in depth, and characters commonly encounter sexual content. Creatures and characters that use sex as the primary motivation and tactic are common. Sex is the subject of this campaign in XXX games. Adventurers spend much of the time or more having sex with people and monsters they encounter as they do battling them. Sex scenes are described in detail as characters who are chased find themselves at a serious disadvantage, or at least seriously frustrated, while their companions rut in hedonism abandon around them. Okay. We got a passage on consent here. Love and sex between player characters. Well, let's see what this says about that. Sometimes players allow love to blossom between their characters. This is understandable, as the characters are not only companions, but also spend their time together, fight unspeakable dangers, and otherwise stick together through thick and thin. However, this sort of behavior can have some serious consequences in your game. Characters may get married and have children, or they could fall prey to jealousy, envy, and other dark emotions. On the plus side, allowing love between your player characters provides a wealth of adventure hooks and motivations. In an ideal situation, the characters look out for each other and do their best to keep each other safe. The lovers can become a true team, complementing each other's strengths and weaknesses more than other comrades. However, just as with any relationship, love has its problems. Players may spend more time having their characters bicker over issues of the relationship or spend time worrying about their love than the adventure. In extreme cases, play can get bogged down or sidetracked by the character's problems. If you choose to allow characters to express their love for each other or engage in sex, remember that your group's dynamics will change dramatically. Players may spend time worried about their relationships or getting one another into bed rather than focusing on the adventure. Let's see. We've got a section here on kinks and fetishes and prostitution. I'll go over to the comments for a moment. Heather says, I wish I could remember what I used. This sounds weird, but I had a celibate cleric, and there were stat boosts in there someplace to use. Jason says, I honestly don't believe much of what Brink is saying. I've got comments on that too. I took a bunch of notes on that, and I didn't want to just put something out. I wanted to be right, so I was taking notes. Meta making a D&D virtual experience with the OGL. That's what he was talking about. He was saying that was a major part of this, and he specifically brought up pornographic content. Somebody making virtual reality pornographic Dungeons and Dragons. Let's see. Okay, well, I scrolled down some. So, okay, so pornography as well. The consequences of love and sex. Marriage and bonding. Commitment and infidelity. What is it? Say we got several examples here. What is this? In a game that involves sexual aspects, the topic of commitment and infidelity come up, causing both joy and woe for the person involved. Commitments and fidelity are culturally defined. A wide variety of norms are possible, some of them defined narrowly, some broadly. Okay, well, let's just move on from that. Pregnancy and childbirth. At its core, sex is about procreation. The act of sex is done to ensure the survival of the species, for without it, there would be no life. In a typical game, sex is absent, and thus children are rarely heard or seen unless they're involved in the plot in some way. A barbarian horde has captured all the children of the village and plans to sell them into slavery. With games that include sex, the chance of pregnancy is a possible outcome, regardless of the wishes of the couple involved. In the pseudo-medieval world of fantasy role-playing, siring children is an important aspect of a person's existence. For commoners and other peasant folk, having children, often many, ensures there are enough hands to help raise the crops, work the field, mill the wheat, cobble the shoes, and 1,000 other tasks that require a hands-on approach. Nobles is the continuance of bloodline. Okay. So how do adventurers handle pregnancy? If it's planned, it should be a joyous event, with proud parents putting in time, money, and energy toward the welfare of the child. If it's unplanned and occurs outside of marriage, the couple must deal with the same issues that occur in real life. Should they get married? Who will be responsible for the child's welfare? Will the child be accepted into the family or be considered a bastard? If she comes to term, however, the female adventurer might find herself less inclined to head as she comes to term. However, a female adventurer might find herself less inclined to head into dangerous situations as her body and natural instincts curtail such ambitions. Conversely, these adventurers may have greater passion and will to adventure to provide for their offspring's future. Now, see, one way that I think that this could come up in world building, and in fact that we have talked about in the channel before, Brianna and I talked about this. We had a General Geekdom episode where we were having a panel discussion about depictions of the feminine in fantasy and things like that. And one of the things that had come up was how would we make a realistic society of female Spartans? Like, let's say that you wanted to run have a fantasy Spartan society, and you wanted them all to be women. So you wanted the women to be the warriors and the men to basically, stay home or, perhaps be enslaved or something like that. But nonetheless, you're talking about a society of purely female warriors. How could that even work? What type of fantasy elements would we have to have in order to get a society that uses its women exclusively as warriors to work? So, and we did talk about that, and we talked about some different types of magical elements that we could have in play, what exactly we thought the issues were, and then how that would realistically kind of prevent that situation from happening. But that if we wanted that to happen in a fantasy environment, what type of magic could we have, or what type of other things would we have to include in order to make it viable? So, that's something I think that is certainly valid to think about if you're from your world building perspective. How does a whole society handle that? Zero Theory says, never really heard of this book until now. I can see WotC having an issue with its cover style in the same way they used to do their PHB and expansions. I do not know. I didn't really even think about that. Hopefully, we're not going to come up with anything. Hopefully, that's a good question. I didn't actually think about imagery. I was thinking about just content. So comments, cultural taboos, universal taboos, rites of passage, marriage, commitment, and customs, duration of marriage, so this is this paladin here that's being used as an example. So is this about alignment here? I guess it is. Oh, I don't want to. Hang on. Let me take this down for a second. Okay, there is potentially some imagery that I don't want to just show on YouTube. Let me scroll. Let me skip down. Let me skip down here. So we got information on. I'll pull it back up once I scroll down a little bit further. So this book does have some topless depictions of women in it. We're looking at dwarves here. Different races here. So as an example, let's come up with an example right here. What does it say about halflings? Okay, let's see about halflings. Community is essential, is as central to life in halfling society. Love and acceptance flourish. Sexual sharing is a manifestation of community and fellow feeling among adults. They frequently copulate with people they merely like, whose company they enjoy, or they seem to need solace that intimate physical contact offers. Non-halflings, who might view halflings as being merely cute, are astonished to witness the incredible diversity of halfling sex and the enthusiasm with which they engage in it. I think this is an interesting example because I think George R.R. Martin specifically had called out that can you really imagine the hobbits having sex? And that was part of his critique of the Lord of the Rings, because he was like, sexuality is such an important part of humanity, but it's not really present in the Lord of the Rings. And can you even imagine something like sexual halflings like that, because it wasn't present? So here they were saying that, okay, maybe halflings are very sexual. Let's see. So we've got descriptions of a whole bunch of different races and potentially their attitudes towards sex. Merfolk and tritons, minotaurs, nymphs. Well, nymphs you would think are probably the most sexual here, right? Ogres and orcs. So we're going through a whole bunch of different types of creatures here. Outsiders. Okay, rules, skills, and feats. So what is it? So that was all cultural descriptions and so forth. But let's go over here to rules and see what it actually says about rules. Let me scroll down here and see if there's anything in this section that visually I don't want to put up. Okay, no, yeah, like that. Okay. Okay, but let's take a look at rules. That's a little while away, so I'll put this back up. Let me go over here to the comments here before I do. Hey, Vision, good to see you. Micah says, yeah, the graphic depiction of violence versus sexuality is definitely a major American thing and way worse in the past than now, but still iffy. Yeah, DM Thor says, a lot of countries are more sexually liberal than the U.S. Let me scroll down some more. Let's see. Wait, so Robert says the post hoc legacy disclaimers are the post hoc legacy disclaimers are another example, Heath. Maybe take a look at those too. I think that is worth taking a look at. Maybe not immediately, but I think that's also something to look at, and I think it's also something that's worth discussing with Kyle about. Like, that's something that I think would be on something that should be discussed with should be discussed. I think some people had some valid criticisms of what seemed like hypocrisy in that area, but I would be interested to know exactly what, because I've seen that there are those disclaimers, but I don't even know what exactly are they referring to. Got to be careful with that sometimes, Zero Theory says. Got to be careful with that sometimes. As many a horror story of Crit Crab has pointed out, many players can't make a solid separation between player and PC. Yeah, that's true. When I'm writing the text, when I'm writing about it, I'm very careful, like in a rule book or something like that. I'm very careful to try to put, do I mean the player or do I mean the character? I try to be very clear about that because that's a very important distinction. And the reason I was thinking about that distinction is because, like, especially when you're talking about the history of something like the Satanic Panic or something like that, that there is an extremely important distinction between the player and the player's character. I mean, you're not doing these things. You're playing a game, and the character is doing these things in the game. And sometimes we speak loosely and we talk about the player or the character. And as I'm typing, I may be speaking loosely, but once you go back and you edit and things like that, that's an extremely important distinction. But even though I like to be sure that I make that as clear as I can in speech, like I said, when I'm not speaking casually and may screw up, but especially in written texts, a lot of people don't know that. Yeah. See, so far, right? So we've got some illustrations here that, but so far. That's what he was talking about. That's what he was talking about. That was on. Somebody will know the name of that YouTube channel, but TEOS was the guy whose name was interviewing. So Jason says, a note on prostitution. In Conan lore, there are faiths that practice sacred prostitution, if I recall. Durko and I think Ishtar are both goddesses, among other things. By the way, this show is going to run long. I don't want to return to this particular subject, but I want to investigate the book, and so I'm going to keep going here. But on that subject, let me also say, does anybody know this book? I've got this book sitting here. I want to reread it, but I really enjoyed this book. The Barrow. This is by Mark Smiley. I thought this was a great book. I don't know. It's set in a particular world that he was developing. I think mainly as a graphic novels, and I don't know anything about that. But I loved this book. I thought, as far as an adventuring, a story about going into a dungeon. Now, the start of this book and the end of this book is actually an adventuring party in a dungeon. But this book has very violent content, and it also has very sexual content in it. It has very sexual content in it. But, I didn't mind that, as long as you know what you're going into and what you're reading. I thought this book was excellent. So, even, a game that is based on a world like this, there were also, I was reminded of that because there are priestesses of sexuality or priestesses that use sex and sacred rites and things like that in that book. And I completely enjoyed that. So actually, I should use that as another example about, what type of material from a morality perspective are people are okay with if you're trying to put out this kind of morality clause or something like that. Because, I mean, that book was very explicit. and I also don't typically read material like that. But I thought that was a particularly exceptional book. But it does contain both very violent graphic violence and graphic sexuality in it. And I thought it was a fantastic book. Okay, so let's go. Let me bring this up. We're going to know when we get to a picture here. But we've got Rules for sex. You may ask yourself why the Book of Erotic Fantasy includes rules for sex. Remember, the rules presented here are optional and are tailored to specific instances in which a die roll will make an impact on how the game progresses. For example, many of the feats provided here require a perform sexual techniques check to see if a bonus is granted to the character. This bonus has an impact on the mechanics of the game, and thus a die roll is required. Just as there are stretches of a game that do not involve any die rolling, so too are there times when characters will engage in sex without having to make a roll. If you feel that making a character roll to see how well they perform, feel free to do so. Otherwise, ignore it and let the natural course of role-playing and description carry the moment. So we have got a distinction between a character's force of personality and charm, charisma, and their simple physical appearance, which becomes appearance. So APP, for appearance, add a 7th ability score. This may have been what you were talking about, Heather. So here is another rule. For appearance, add a 7th ability score. Determine it as you do other abilities. When creating this new character, roll for the 7 attributes instead of 6. So we do have appearance, skills, and I guess how that changes up skills here. Juvenile creatures seem to be more attractive, softer, and rounder features. Nature or the deities may make them cuter or more lovable in their adult form. They receive a +2 bonus on appearance-related skill checks. This changes once they reach puberty. Sadly, appearance declines further with age. So I guess when they're talking about juvenile here, they're talking about cuteness. They make them cuter. I hope that's where we're going here as far as, we should not let harm come to that. I think that's where we're going here. We're going to go with that. Okay, now here we do talk about the description of particular sexual anatomy here. Let's just skip past that. Let's see. So sustaining sex does have to do with the length of a sexual encounter, and we've got DCs for that. Now we're into sexually transmitted diseases. I guess we've got fantasy versions of different diseases here, some of which do have rather graphic names. I'm going to take this down for a moment as we're approaching imagery. Now we're getting into pregnancy here. Okay, so this one right here. Okay, let's talk about people talk about this being in let me go over the comments, but this is like who can have children with who. Sable Phoenix says, this book is just as bad. I once acquired a PDF of it and deleted it long after. Not because of the content per se. I think its infamy isn't quite deserved. It's just not a good supplement. See, my expectation when I got into this was that it's probably overblown. Whether or not it's a good supplement or a bad supplement, I figured that the probability that would be like just shocked on the content level would not be happening. So Micah says it's very niche, Sable Phoenix, which limits its usefulness. For world building, it certainly can be useful for both games and novels, but rare one uses any of it outside of an E, which I suppose is like erotic RPG session. Yep. So yes, thank you, Chase. Thank you very much. So this is crossbreeding in a world filled with sexual and exotic creatures. In a world filled with bizarre and exotic creatures, sex between different species happens with unusual frequency. Creatures of the same type, humanoid, monstrous, humanoid, etc., are able to produce children, although this progeny is a half-breed with traits of both parents. Some creatures are noted or infamous in their ability to sire children regardless of the species of the other partner. Celestials, fiends, dragons, and fae, due to their inherent magical nature, may produce children with far more species than those of mortal blood. In other cases, there's no chance of conception, due to the differences in anatomy, creature type, or magical differences. However, powerful magic or the act of a deity might allow a child to be created as the result of sex between two completely different species. And isn't this actually becoming more common in the rules in 1D&D or 6th edition or something like that? That, hey, just you can be half of whatever, just kind of combine them. But nonetheless, we do have this table here about what species can interbreed with other species. Hang on, let me scroll down in advance here. So we've got different feats here. Let's just look at an example here. So disarming looks. Your physical appearance can fool other people into ignoring your other attributes, abilities, and faults. Once per day, you may re-roll any bluff, diplomacy, gather information, or intimidate check in which your gender and physical appearance may apply, such as seduction or convincing a guard of the opposite sex to let you by. You must accept the second roll. Recovering more quickly after sex. You may use your physical looks to promote your enchantment spells. Okay. We got background images here. Or background, we got images here. We got different backgrounds here. Are we in chapter 3? Okay, so prestige classes. So we're into chapter 3 now, which are prestige classes. So an imagist? Yeah, what is that? Gifted from birth with natural beauty, imagists parlay with their physical attractiveness into parlay their physical attractiveness into potent magic. Like a sorcerer, an imagist's power is inborn. She does not need spell books, training, or practice. Okay, so that's like a magic user of some kind. Kundala, Kundla, a blend of martial prowess and mystical energy. A Kundala embarks on a physical and mental journey toward perfection and enlightenment. Their training combines physical discipline and a spirit quest for understanding the universe through a mastery of their minds and bodies. Let's see. Other classes here. Disciple of Alarant. While almost all good religions espouse love and trust for one another, disciples of Alarant believe that love and sex are the primary reasons for existence. Divine celibate. Oh, this may be what you were talking about as well, Heather. So a divine celibate. The deity Sevelus calls to those who wish to devote their bodies and minds to purity in her worship. Those who follow her are usually human or elf. Many divine celibates are paladins. Some rangers choose a chaste life in their service and enjoy the companionship of their unicorn mount. Occasionally, an attractive fighter or rogue may choose the divine celibate's path of purity. Rarely, a sorcerer or bard is moved to become a servant of Sevelus. Spellcasters rarely pursue the celibate life, and divine celibates, even those willing to give up sex in the deity's service, usually cannot bear to be parted from their spellcasting progression. NPC divine celibates live a life in a variety of settings. Larger temples to celibates have few celibates as curates. In addition, In addition, they frequently serve as tutors, chaperones, and guardians for the children of royal or noble families. Like paladins, they also adventure in the cause of the church. So that may have been it. Fae enticer, beautiful and elusive. These words come to mind when one thinks of a fae. Even among these lovely creatures, they are paragons of attractiveness and those that epitomize desire. Fae who seek to enhance their natural spell-like and supernatural abilities become fae enticers. Though devotion to beauty and taking superlative care of themselves, they become even more beautiful. So lots of different classes. So I guess that's your crunch side. Lots of different classes. Harem protector is a class. Among certain societies, harems and concubines are common, accepted as parts of the social fabric. To protect them from unwanted eyes or even worse, kidnappers who wish to claim the concubines as their own, warriors are in charge of their safety. Let me go over here to comments. Yeah, talking about the difference between this and Europe. Let me come down here. Hey, Sarah. Yeah. See, then there are sex and fertility gods and goddesses in Greek, Roman, Norse, etc., and mythology. And actually, that would be something that I would be interested in from the world building perspective and the gameplay perspective in general, is like, because that's not something you encounter in today's world. Like, I don't go out and I don't encounter fertility gods and goddesses in here in the South here, but the United States in general. That's not something that we do. But it was historically. If you've got these different pantheons, you're talking about Greek, Roman, Norse. I think that we often, in general, understate the impact of religion in general on societies in the past. When we're talking about writing fantasies or even particularly even interpreting things historically. But, sex or fertility gods and goddesses is not something that we regularly encounter. And so how does that change society? How does that need to be involved in the world building? And how could you incorporate it? I mean, I think that's an extremely valid kind of thing to talk about in a historical setting, but also in a fantasy setting. Let's see. Sarah says, so would a book like this now be valid for 5e since it's in Creative Commons? Well, okay. I think that is an excellent question. And it's one that I would like to directly put to Kyle, because he was talking about one of the reasons that he was so concerned about, was hateful material, but then also he specifically brought up sexual and pornographic material. But with the 5.1 SRD under that Creative Commons license, you don't have any control over what somebody would create. So if he was so concerned about it, why would he all of a sudden do that, make that change now? Change in his perspective, because I think it was always open over 1.0A. But if you put this out under Creative Commons, then anybody could write anything like this or worse, depending on what your opinion of this particular book here is. It could be worse. It could be completely different. It could be more explicit. It could have. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything that's stopping anybody from writing a book of erotic fantasy for 5.1 because the Creative Commons license. Yes, Zero Theories. They used to have comeliness or beauty in some of the older D&D books. I remember that. I want to have succubi are going to appear in Theophany. Hay says, I think when it comes to interspecies breeding and procreation, that would depend more on the game setting and the world building than anything a supplement says is possible. And Robert says, the Catholic Church wasn't this prudish in in what about the Renaissance? Why are human depictions in the naked form offensive? I understand the context of a YouTube, but as a general matter, yeah, I don't want to run afoul of anything on YouTube. So that's that's one of them. But as a general matter, art, I mean, I agree. Because I mean, that's another see, that's another one of those things that you would think they would not want to have to address. Like I'm talking about somebody like Kyle at Wizards, because it seems like Ryan Dancy had the right idea that we don't even want to be involved in trying to police this. Where does nudity from an artistic perspective begin and end, and then obscenity start, or something like that? Like, I would not want to be involved in making that call. I mean, I can make a call for what I would, want to watch or read or something like that, but I would not be trying to make that as a general call. Let's see. I'm just scrolling down the comments here. Conan has an orgy built in. This was the whole genre, sexy men and women in combat. And that's the branding in the fantasy genre for almost a century. We did talk about, we talked about specifically that, I believe, on General Geekdom. Comeliness was introduced in AD&D Unearthed Arcana book. It was one of those that brought us the Cavalier. I played a Cavalier, Thief, Acrobat, and the Barbarian. Okay, let me go back over to the book. So, Pierced Mystic. I think I'm still in classes. Yeah, Pierced Mystic. Sages have long speculated the skin is coursed with energy. Pierced mystics know how to harness this energy, tapping into through the years of piercings, needles, rings, and other adornments that free this energy from magical purposes. So we do have sacred prostitute here. So the sacred prostitute is a being dedicated to offering herself as a blessed vessel and temple to those who wish to show their appreciation and respect to the deities through the bliss of sexual congress. The sacred prostitute is not a common streetwalker or tavern whore. She is a devout worshiper who allows herself to become a sexual partner for any and all who enter the temples to seek her out in public. Some sects reject payment for the services, although most do accept donations. The sacred prostitute is allowed to keep a small amount for herself, while the remainder goes to church coffers and is then used for charitable acts and the building of a grander temples of their deity. So that we were just talking about that kind of thing in other stories. Voyeuristic seer. This was definitely back in the days when, hey, what do you want to have in your book? A lot of different classes. Because that's the crunch. I never really completely understood that. I mean, because there's only so many different classes you're able to use anyway, especially if you're a player. I mean, and you probably already have a character anyway. So I never really found the need to have, 15 or 20 new classes in every book. I never really found that very useful. Okay, so we get to magic now. So we've got different domains here. New domains: body domain, denial domain, joining domain, pervasion. Yeah, that's a pervasion domain, pleasure domain, voyeur domain, new bard spells. New bard spells below are original spells that can be added to your bard's repertoire. These include things like, I think we're in the clear here as far as imagery goes. So new bard spells: dilapidatory, removing hair, telekinesis similar to grope. Well, there you go. Grope. Telekinesis similar to a physical touch. Ale goggles. Target perceives another as having +4 bonus to appearance. Disrobe. Subject's non-magical clothing and armor falls off. Cleric spells. Pleasant Dreams. Magic Probe. Reveals all spells currently active on a target. Block the Seed. Prevents conceptualization for 1 hour per level. Now, see, the Druid could also be involved in fertility and things like that. So, analyze fertility for a Druid spell. Determine how fertile a target is and reveal conception influencing spells. But see, like Calm Weather is in here too. Removes weather affecting spells. Does that have something to do with erotic fantasy? New Paladin spells. Detect Disease. Mantle of Love. Subject gains a +4 morale bonus on saves 1 minute per level. Ranger spells. I have to scroll. What's going on? No, okay. We're not. I think this is as close to this topic as anything that involves anything like that as we're going to get. I will not be going over Fatal on this this channel. Let's see. Nevinor says there needs to be a Seduce Dragon spell for bards. Let's see. Okay. My mind went in the same direction. Chase. I was like, oh my God, what is that? There is 3rd level sorcerer and wizard spell, reverse gender. Reverse target's gender for 1 hour per level. So then we get, so those are all the spells. Then we get into all the spells in more detail. So that was like a summary, 1 sentence of all the different spells. Beauty's Caress. Bard 3rd level, Images 3rd, Cleric 4th. When touched, the target becomes more attractive, poised, and self-confident. He gains a +D4, a 1d4 per 2 levels of caster level. Enhancement to both appearance and charisma score. This is probably a large part of this book here, too. So those were a lot of spells in there. And so now we go over all of the spells in more detail. Here's our Magic Probe spell. Peacock's Beauty. What is that? The transmuted creature becomes more attractive. The spell gains +4 enchantment bonus to appearance, adding the usual benefits to the appearance-based skill checks and other use of appearance modifier. Imagists and other spellcasters who rely on appearance affect the spell do not gain any additional bonus for spells for increased appearance. Pillow Talk. A creature subject to the spell can't speak any deliberate or intentional lies to you. An affected creature is not necessarily aware of this enchantment, but may make a sense motive check as opposed to the caster's bluff. If it fails, the target is unaware of the caster's manipulation. If successful, she realizes she's speaking more freely than she should and therefore must avoid answering questions directly, as long as she remains within the boundaries of the truth. But you have to have had sex with the target within the last 10 minutes to cast that spell. I figured there was something in there on that. All right, lots of spells. I think, okay, so we're through the spell. No, we're still in magic. Okay, items. So now we do have items that have to do with sexuality in here. Okay, and sex objects. Aphrodisiacs, birth control devices, sexual services, escort, streetwalker, brothel, prostitute, master and mistress, talking about armor, potions, rings, rods, and staves. All different kinds of magic items here. Gods. Okay, so gods and monsters is the next chapter. In a game that embraces sexuality, the dalliances of the deities takes on a completely new meaning. Legends and myths are often told of deities coming down from the heavens to mate with mortals. Sometimes these unions have a happy ending, resulting in a child that inevitably becomes a great hero, demigod, or deity in their own right. In other cases, the sexual encounters between deities and mortals have tragic endings, with the mortal dying, changing in some horrible way, or otherwise becoming cursed. Regardless, children are born from sex between the deities and mortals are destined to do remarkable things for good or ill. So, okay, so we've got new gods in here. And also stuff about their clerics and clergy. So this is probably gods with more... verse, the prolific mother, Warren Queen, black goat with 1,000 young. So we have some kind of reference to Shub here, which is a goblin goddess. So, okay, so we do have, so I mean, that's potentially useful. I'm not reading through and seeing exactly what they're like, but okay, probably, we were just talking about gods and goddesses in a pantheon. Probably the gods and goddesses in the Dungeons and Dragons pantheons that you read about don't really deal that much with sexuality and fertility, and so here are some potential ways to gods to incorporate that into it. It would be, of course, you couldn't use those same gods, but it would also be interesting to talk about from the world building perspective, if it's mentioned fertility or something like that, exactly what that means and how that could come into play. Wait, what is this? Oh, still under gods and monsters. So I think different creations from human god hybrids, I guess. Half demon, creating a half demon. We're kind of getting to the end here. Adventurers and organizations, adventure ideas that I suppose all have some type of sexual theme to them. Adventurers and organizations. Looks like a layout of a brothel, probably, or maybe some kind of temple. And that's okay. So that's it. All right, let's see what people are saying. That was kind of my initial opinion as well. To be honest, these spells sound too much in the weeds. You could achieve a similar effect with more basic spells. Stray says, I had a character swap genders for a week from a magic trap. They had a much more respect for the other gender after that. Traditionally, isn't it the case that I've always remembered this, that as in some of the high fantasy, high magic tellings of King Arthur, that Merlin is supposed to have turned King Arthur into all these different things in order to, so that he could gain wisdom. What's it like being a squirrel or an elk? Or he trains him to all these different things. But the one thing that he never changed Arthur into was a woman, so that he would never know how Guinevere was actually thinking. I remember that. I don't know exactly where I got that from, but I just remember that being some part of classic King Arthur, that Merlin never turned him into a woman. I noticed a couple of things with that, but I don't know that actually, when it was talking about the Beauty's Caress or something like that, I noticed that one did have it be cast on a man. So I think that's true. See, Jappert says, so this is a bit overblown in his infamy. I don't get the impression mechanics are all that good, though I have little context. Yes. So yeah, sex toys, handcuffs, other things follows. That's exactly what was in here. So, I also wonder how much of this has to do with the depiction. So there's some pretty weird art in here. It looks like a lot of it was like computer generated. So like computer generated art at this time that is sexual in nature and has nudity in it. I wonder how that would change. Like, I wonder what the opinion on this book would be if it didn't have any of that. We're not even, what does it take? But I wonder about that, because that's just completely ridiculous on my part that I wasn't even thinking about sexual imagery, like pornographic imagery being in the book. I don't know why I didn't even think about that. So there is, but I wonder if you took the exact same book's content and then you removed the imagery in it and just had the text. We don't have the context of like anything exactly that they objected to as far as the D20 license. But I wonder if imagery actually has to do with that. If you just had the text descriptions and you just talked about everything else this book talked about, would there still have been as big a problem? And I do think this book is definitely the Streisand effect. It's people want to look at it simply because somebody had a major problem with it. Probably, maybe it's the case that the thing that should have happened is people should just ignore it. And maybe that's a good strategy going forward. What should you do if somebody publishes something really weird with 5.1 under Creative Commons? Do you freak out about it and try to get it banned and taken off of stuff, or do you just kind of let it go? I think that too. I do believe there's a tasteful way to do a supplement like this with both art and prose. Unfortunately, the book of erotic fantasy doesn't hit that mark. See, of course, what exactly is tasteful is going to depend on individual people. But I'm saying that if I were to do this book and I were trying to do this, first of all, would you include imagery or would you not? But if I were, I would certainly include very different imagery than what this book actually included. It's got some weird, creepy stuff in it. So, yeah. So, I wonder how I want to address this. Because like I said, in Tales of Rabavania, I'm not dealing with sexuality and that kind of stuff. So that's not going to be present in that. But I do want that to be present in Theophany. So we'll just have to see. We'll just have to see. But Wizards wants to be the sole arbiter, right? And specifically, I want to know who that person would have been. And would you be comfortable being that arbiter, right? It's different, especially in the context of an open license, because it's different, as we've always said, that if you're trying to do licensing some particular aspect of something to one other person, and you've got very tight controls over what you want, the kind of material to be associated with this is, and then you're licensing it out to that person, and like for a movie script or something, oh, don't include this type of material. Like, I do not want this type of material to be included. That can be negotiated back and forth. It's completely valid. It's a completely different kind of thing when you're trying to operate in an open license environment. It's very different. So anyway, I don't know if there's a whole lot more to say. I guess I'm not. I guess I kind of figured that I didn't think that going into it that it was going to be just absolutely horrific, because most things that I find on the internet when people are freaking out about something, they're like, oh my God, do I want to go investigate that? Typically, as a general rule, I figure out that it's not quite as bad as people are just freaking out about on the internet. So I don't really think this book needs to be freaked out about. I do think that probably because addressing the topic, as Sable Phoenix is saying, is not, I don't think should be taboo, as long as people know what they're getting into, is taboo. But this one does seem to have very bizarre, pornographic imagery and in some really bizarre imagery in the case. And I wonder how much that holds against it. And then also some level of just crude material. I think that as I was scrolling by, that seemed to be handled crudely. Although, like I said in the very beginning, I was interested to know how it set it up. And that opening chapter or opening few sections that I read did seem to be pretty reasonable information about including this kind of material in a game. So there you go. Sarah says, I think this a lot of this gameplay depends on what the goals are. Is this a regular adventuring party but with some sexual mechanics, or is the game going to be promiscuous and use sex for progression? Yeah, and it seemed to be not terribly clear on that, because it did say, here are the different levels and different rankings that you could include this material in your game. Because to me, dealing with gods and goddesses of fertility and sex rights and things like that can be fascinating from a world building perspective. Chase says, to me, the most useful part of this book is the pregnancy terms and childbirth of various races, including some monster races. Then they threw nude images in it all around for no reason. And bizarre nude images. See, that's a setting dealing with demons, especially succubi and incubi, which is exactly what I want to deal with in Theophany, or part of what is in there. Walking among mortals should definitely acknowledge sexuality, as would a setting centered around Anne Rice style vampires. Oh, that's a very interesting one too. Vampires in the Anne Rice style, how to handle that. Yeah, I'm more interested in sex-flavored classes in an adventure world, not particularly as sex as a mechanic progression. So, yeah, all right. So, well, you're welcome. I appreciate everybody who was here. I think that, especially in light of, I suppose people would be like, oh my God, this one's a not safe for work stream, which is not typically the kinds of stuff that I want to do. But I do think that it's important. The reason that I wanted to look at it is because the topics of these morality things and what is or is not permitted, especially in the context of an open license, is coming up so much. And it seems that we have so few examples. People talk about, oh my God, it's out there, it's out there, it's out there. We have so few examples. Here at least is a touch point. So at least now we know. So maybe we can be more intelligent and be a bit more informed regarding our discussions on these subjects. That's what I think. So that's why I was interested in taking a look at this. All right. So that's a wrap. Now, tonight, I was going to have a lunch meeting this afternoon, but that got postponed until Sunday. So I'm going to try to work here. But tonight, we have a live stream tonight for the Cool Name RPG. The Cool Name RPG is done by Mark Tassin. Mark Tassin is going to be here with me tonight, 7:30 Central Time. 7:30 p.m. Central Time. Mark Tassin will be talking to him and the development of the Cool Name RPG. I'm specifically interested in it because it's not 5th edition, and not necessarily because I have a problem with the 5th edition mechanics. It seems like I don't need to have. I've got a different opinion about Dungeons and Dragons itself, but Black Flag is basically going to be continuing 5th edition. So I thought it was interesting that it seems like there is a opportunity for what Mark Tassin is doing. We've got, if you want to go continue with 5th edition, we got Black Flag. If we want to take a look at entirely new mechanics, we're going to have a Cool Name RPG. So I'm very interested in both of those. So we'll be talking about that tonight. But I also do want to talk about tomorrow. We'll be talking about Level Up, the Advanced 5th edition by InWorld and N Publishing, which oddly I have not heard talked about very much at all, especially when I was talking about in other videos about who could become the new Paizo of 5th edition. And of course, it may be Kobold Press, but I had completely forgotten that this advanced 5th edition by InWorld or in Publishing existed, and I never hear it talked about. So I don't know anything about it, but it never comes up, but it's out there, and it's supposed to be 5th edition. I mean, extending 5th edition, but nobody, for whatever reason, brought up in Publishing as something that would go on with 5th edition. So I want to check that out tomorrow. So we'll be talking to Mark tonight, and then be looking at that in the morning. So thank you, everybody, for being here. I will talk to you tonight. I look forward to seeing you. Grind on.